Could you slightly changing the subject? In the past conversations, we mentioned some pillars of classical logic: the principle of non-contradiction, excluded middle. I mean, of course, I assume there is nothing comparable to what we call classical logic, because of course this had to await the 20th century with all the mathematic machinery that were developed then. But debates about these issues must have existed. Could you give us a picture of what is the equivalent of the Western debate on the status of logic and reasoning, correct reasoning in Buddhism?
Well, okay, so for a start, let's go back to this question of the means of knowing things. So I said before that there are two important ones: perception is one and inference is another. Buddhist epistemologists are well aware of this, and so they theorize inference. So there are two very important epistemologists in Buddhist thought around the 6th century, I think, Dignaga and Dharmakirti, who articulate acceptable forms of inference. And what you get is a theory of reasons, of hetu, as they call them, and how you structure appropriate arguments. If you were to look at what they say, you'd think this is kind of a bit like Aristotelian syllogistic. It's not exactly that. There are many kinds of differences, but it would look a bit like that to you. They develop important theories of how the arguments work and how they fit in with the rest of epistemology. Very sophisticated arguments. So the extent to which you find a discussion of logic, you'll find it there. Okay. Now, you ask specifically about principles like excluded middle and non-contradiction. You won't find them there. Remember that even in Aristotle, these are not logical principles, they're metaphysical principles. They're discussing the metaphysics, not the analytics. I don't think they come to be seen as logical principles until sometime in the Middle Ages. Anyway, of course, Buddhists and Hindus are aware of these principles, but as I say, you don't find discussions of them in the sort of logical texts. You certainly find discussion of the metaphysical texts. And if you look at the early Buddhist discussions, those from about the 5th century BCE to people like Dignaga and Dharmakirti, so it's the next 1,000 years or so, what you will see is that many Buddhist philosophers subscribe to a principle called the Chatushkoti. Chatushkoti means 4 points, and the 4 points are these. If you make some claim, there are 4 possibilities: that it's true, that it's false, that it's both, that it's neither. And this seems to be a sort of standard taxonomy of possibilities in India around the time of the Buddha. It's not just the Buddhists who subscribe to this, other people seem to. And a lot of discussion in Buddhism for the next 1,000 years works within this framework. Modern scholars discuss how to conceptualize this framework. How do you understand the both? How do you understand the neither? But the kind of flat-footed understanding of this, which I confess I subscribe to, is that the both should be taken as a violation of principle of non-contradiction, and the neither should be taken as a violation of the principle of excluded middle. I'll go into bat and defend that. What happens around the 6th century, the time of Dignaga and Dharmakirti, is this: you get a kind of sea change. Because, as I said, there are enormous debates going on between the different kinds of Buddhists, the different kinds of Hindus, and the Buddhists and the Hindus. At this time, India is a hotbed of philosophical debate. And the orthodox Hindus believe in non-contradiction and excluded middle. And in the debates between the Hindus and the Buddhists, Dignaga and Dharmakirti come to accept the Hindu position. So if you look at Dignaga and Dharmakirti, they endorse the excluded middle and non-contradiction. So a lot of Buddhist philosophy post this actually presupposes these principles. Some modern scholars try to read this back into the earlier Buddhist texts and say, of course, they didn't really mean both true and false when they said both true and false. That's a scholarly and contentious issue, which I've had the pleasure in taking part. But it can't be denied that around about the 5th or 6th century, there is this kind of sea change when epistemology in Buddhism really hits its strides.